Hey guys, it's Ray here. Welcome to Interrupting Sports, the show devoted to inspiring positive change. This is Season 1, Episode 1, and today I'm excited to talk to you all about why identity is important in sports. Okay guys, so let's talk about identity. What do we mean when we say identity? Well, identity, we're looking at all the components of ourselves that make us who we are, make us unique individuals. You hear all the time that everybody has their unique components which allow them to contribute something valuable that nobody else can. That's what forms your identity. So why are we talking about identity today? Well, I want to define a few terms because today we're going to learn about racial identity, ethnic identity, and athletic identity and understand their relationship. So first, looking at racial identity. That's looking at the significance and the meaning of race in one's life. So here you're looking at the physical features such as your skin color. That's what first comes to mind for many people. When you're talking about ethnic identity, here you're looking more to your nationality, and here you have cultural values that are embodied. So very similar to racial identity, however, the cultural value sets it apart. And then finally, we have something called athletic identity, and this is where we're looking at sports here. Athletic identity is the degree to which individuals identify as athletes. So 3 terms here: racial identity, ethnic identity, and athletic identity. But today we're really concerned with the relationship between racial identity and athletic identity. Because after some studies, if you look at research done in the early 2000s, Jackson and colleagues and Browns and colleagues, you would find that there's a relationship between racial identity and athletic identity. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So looking to this research, what happened here is higher athletic identity in Black student athletes, meaning Black student athletes who had a high degree of athletic identity, resulted in a dissociation of these individuals with their racial ethnic group memberships. So what does that mean? That means that as a Black student athlete, and say I had a high degree of athletic identity, meaning I really defined myself as an athlete, I was likely to find myself less associated with my racial ethnic group membership. So therefore assigning myself as Black and all the cultural values that embody that. So the problem here is that these Black student athletes that had this higher athletic identity, they were less able to perceive racial discrimination as a problem in the United States. So because of their relationship with sports, them being athletic, they were blinded by the racial discrimination faced by the norm in the US population. That does not mean now that they didn't face racial discrimination themselves. What it means is that in this particular sample done in this research, keep in mind in the early 2000s, in the US, these Black student athletes saw racial discrimination as less of a problem for them because of their athletic abilities and therefore their success in sports. So why are we talking about this? Well, athletic identity, it enhances one's sense of self, self-confidence, and self-worth. So we're talking about this because it all encompasses the general idea of identity. When you're talking about identity, I mentioned earlier your unique values and what you have to bring to the table. So if you're able to enhance your athletic identity as an athlete, you're not only improving your athletic abilities and therefore your performance and ultimately your team's success, you're also improving you as an individual, your self-worth and your self-confidence, and therefore you're reaching your own full potential. So there's a deep-rooted sense of athletic identity within our own identity, and you don't actually have to be an athlete to encompass some form of athletic identity. Everybody has some form of it in them. However, we're just focused on the traditional athlete. When we're talking about these studies and this research, we're looking at Black student athletes having higher athletic identity and their disassociation with racial ethnic group memberships. So what's happening here is you find things like stereotypes coming into play, because this is when you see Black student athletes feeling accepted because of their athletic talents. Therefore, because they're seen as assets to the team or they're bringing in the numbers, they are praised. And because they are praised for their athletic abilities, they are not experiencing the same form of discrimination had they not had those athletic abilities. That does not mean that they do not face racial discrimination. It just means that we're looking at it from a different perspective. So think about that for a moment, because you have to think about, well, how does sports and the success of an athlete, how does that hide reality and what's really going on? When I'm thinking about this, what it gets me thinking about is the blindness of the industry itself and the athletes, the media, the fans in the stands, because you're too busy praising the goal scorer that you don't understand what else they're being put through because of who they are, because of their identity, and they might not even realize it either. So that brings me into a personal story here, an example more relating to sports. So let's talk about my experience as a hockey player. So for me, when I was seen as value added to my hockey team, my racial identity never came to mind. So that's where you're seeing this sort of form of disassociation with your racial ethnic membership, because I didn't consider myself, the black girl on the team. I was just a member of the team, right? I was a part of the Aurora Panthers, I was part of the Markham Stouffville Stars, and I was a part of the Etobicoke Dolphins. That's what I considered myself. And why should I look at it any differently? So sports and my success in sports, what it allowed me to do is to forget that, there are challenges with being black. I was very fortunate to grow up in a very fortunate household. But even with that, just my experience in sport and how I was treated appropriately, essentially, I like to see it as colorblind. It's not that I was praised for succeeding and I'm black, or I was put down because I was black. It was more of I experienced a sheltered lifestyle. And what that meant was exactly that. When I stepped on the ice, it didn't matter. It didn't matter until I was reminded that it mattered. So when I stepped on the ice, no, I didn't think about me being black and had any other thoughts associated with that and how that would affect my gameplay. I just showed up to play. Gave it my all, and had fun. That changed when I was reminded that I had to think twice before, say, retaliating to avoid harsher consequences after the whistle. Because, traditionally, if you're looking at stereotypes, you hear it looks worse if the black kid does it. And you hear that all the time, and you see that all the time, even if it's not being said. There's unfortunately stereotypes and associations with being more aggressive because the black kid retaliated versus someone who isn't of the BIPOC community. It wouldn't look as harsh. So things like that I had to think about. The reason I thought about it and I didn't retaliate, I was the type of player where you could hit me, swipe me against my shins, knock me down after the whistle, and I would play like dead fish, like I wouldn't move. So that it was clear that I was making there's no signs of aggression. I did learn that over time, of course. Like as I was a kid, I didn't really pay attention to that. But as I grew up and I reached my early teen years, I recognized when it was time to fight and when it wasn't. And like 99% of the time, it wasn't worth it. And it's honestly because I didn't want to change how others perceived me. And not only perceived me, but perceived my family. It's hard to put in words. I would say it's really just a feeling where you get like a look. There's a look that you get where you feel that you shouldn't be doing what you're doing, even though if someone else did it, they wouldn't be getting these consequences. So the reason I'm mentioning the story in the first place is because when I'm thinking about this research, I found it just so fascinating how, it wasn't just me. I grew up, like I said, in a very sheltered household, and as well, I was very, very fortunate. So even with that, not having experienced traditional Stories where you hear, unfortunately, growing up in broken households, broken communities. I didn't experience that. I was very fortunate, and yet I still had these notions in my head. So I found that very fascinating to think about. You don't realize, even as a kid, why you choose to act and why you don't. You're in the heat of the moment of the game. Maybe they slashed your goalie and it's a hectic game, it's a playoff game, and you're all riled up. And right before you're about to hit the girl back, you think, let me just take a step back, because this is going to be worse off for my team because I'm the one doing it. It breaks my heart a little thinking back about it, because you really don't realize in the moment why that's such a problem. So now that you've heard my little life story when it comes to my relationship with athletic identity, now let's talk about, in a general sense, looking at the relevancy of me mentioning all of this anyways, and why we're interrupting sports right now to talk about this. The reason here is because I truly believe that sports should not be an escape from who we are. I shouldn't be in a position where I'm forgetting the challenges of being Black, and it's escape from my reality of discrimination, and even if it's not experienced by me, but experienced by those in my culture. And the reason I'm saying that is because sports should not be an escape from who we are. It should bring us together because of who we are. So rather, our unique traits, our identity, those components, they allow us to form stronger connections and stronger bonds with each other and ourselves. And ultimately, that is what's going to improve performance. That is going to allow teammates to gel. And that comes into play with something I call personally, maybe this is a thing I actually don't know, but I call this the Olympic Games effect. So the reason I love the Olympic Games is because nations come from all around the world and nothing matters except execution and representation of your country, because you are proud of where you come from. It doesn't matter what you look like. It doesn't matter about your realities. All that matters is what you're putting on the court, in the competition, in the race, etc. So I call this the Olympic Games effect, because this is when this sort of coming together, I automatically think of the Olympics. That's what I see as the Olympic Games effect anytime I feel that. So when I'm looking at having sports being used as in a position for us to bring us together because of who we are, so we can appreciate where we come from, who we are, and what makes us us as individuals, I think of what I call my Olympic Games effect. It's important to note that although I'm saying this, we're scratching the surface here for sure. I want to emphasize that with this podcast here, Interrupting Sports, we're stopping to take a moment to acknowledge the realities that people are facing. I'm starting with my perspective, but this is a conversation. It doesn't stop here. It starts here. I really invite you all to leave comments, DM me on Instagram, and let me know your thoughts on this, right? You can check out at Interrupting Sports on Instagram. Let us know any of your comments or concerns when it comes to this relationship between athletic identity and race in sports and how we are treated. Ultimately, looking at the relevancy of athletic identity and racial identity, I think of inclusion, because when we're bringing each other, lifting each other up, and we're bringing each other together, what we're seeing is an inclusive environment. And this inclusive environment is the fuel to sports, because even in individual sports, everybody plays a role to allow it to succeed. Even if you're an individual athlete, because your coaches and your trainers and your parents and your support system, that's all part of your team. So it's important to recognize all the players in the game, not just the ones on the court. And having that view and perspective of wanting to include others and wanting to acknowledge this is who you are, this is what you bring to the table, and you should be proud of that. And I want to know you and get to know you on that level in order for us to be better as individuals, to be better together. That is the ultimate goal here. So I thought that was something interesting to share with you guys, and definitely thought you guys would love to hear that. All right, guys, I just wanted to pause here for a moment and just take a plug at my blog here for a second. So I invite you guys to check out my first blog post on our website, interruptingsports.com, to learn more about why it's time for the Interrupting Sports podcast and why we're starting this meaningful conversation. So drop a comment and share your thoughts. I'd love to hear them. Okay, now I want to talk about more on the personal development side. We talked about reality, we talked about inclusion, we talked about identity and how that forms together and how that relates to sports. But now let's talking about getting to that inclusion stage. How do we get to that position where we are inclusive of other people? So this brings me to the topic of becoming comfortable with being uncomfortable. And this goes for everybody. This goes of whether you're uncomfortable because you're the one who feels excluded, or also you are uncomfortable because you are the one who wants to welcome other people, but you're not really sure how. So that's what this conversation is about now. So why are we talking about this? I believe that in order to bring about this positive change, that's what we're striving for with this podcast, right? How do we bring that? Well, we have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable because our inability to step out of our comfort zone limits our experiences. I'll say that again. Our inability to step out of our comfort zone limits our experiences. So what I'm trying to get at here is I'm trying to just pick your brain and get you guys thinking, those wheels turning about how you are in a bubble. Everybody's in a bubble. I'm in a bubble. Unless you put some force on the edge of that bubble is not going to expand. If you just stand there, you're going to be all fine and dandy in your little safe bubble, which is great if that's where you want to be. But why would you limit yourself? Because there's so much more the world has to offer by getting to know other people. And so this is why we're talking about inclusion, diversity, equity, and how to treat people and how to treat yourself. This is the reason that we're bringing these conversations into play. We're just using sports here as a medium because sports has the power of bringing people together. It's that culture that naturally brings people together. So it's the perfect avenue to have this conversation. I grew up in Richmond Hill, Ontario, and I was the only black kid in my class, on my hockey team. Maybe I encountered one or two other black girls on other teams throughout the league, or just another black kid in my grade, but rarely because I also went to French immersion, so it was very small. I didn't see this as a problem at all. Like, there was no issue. Everyone was my friend. I got along with everyone. I had a great time. Just the only black people I really knew were my family. And I didn't see a problem with that. I didn't see a problem with that until I got to high school. So I went to Bill Crothers Secondary School at BCSS in Unionville, Ontario. That is, it's a sports high school, phenomenal school. Absolute great experience there. The reason I'm bringing this up is because in elementary school, I was great. I was comfortable being the only black kid because that's all I knew. I was friends with everyone. I had a good time. Nothing to complain about there. When I got to high school, things kind of threw me for a loop because I had never been in a room with so many black people. And I was kind of like, what's going on here? What's happening? Looking around like, am I in the right place? Because it was just so foreign to me. I didn't see a problem with it. I was just so uncomfortable because I was like, I don't really know what's happening here. Very confused. And so, looking back at that, I really am devastated because that just goes to show that I was more comfortable being the only black kid in a room of everybody else from other cultures or just white people in general. And with my own culture, I was uncomfortable. And I tried to think about, before making this episode, like really why that was and just reflect on how come that was the case. And I came to the conclusion that it wasn't that I was ashamed of being black. I honestly just didn't feel like I belonged because I felt like I was maybe too as we say, like whitewashed, or just I didn't have the experiences that I can relate to them. And so I was uncomfortable because I felt that I had to, quote unquote, act black so that I was considered black, where I never had to like prove my blackness to anybody else, because why? I was the only black kid. There was no need for me to do that. So that was a very interesting experience for me. But luckily, I was able to find my people, and that brings me into getting into the comfort zone once you're in an uncomfortable state. So the key of doing this is having the difficult conversations, because you can't move beyond our reality and move beyond our ways without those difficult conversations. So what did I do? I looked at myself, I said, look, okay, this is an opportunity for me to get to know people of my culture. So what I did is I formed a community. I formed friends. I got to know people on a different kind of level and share those experiences and relate to them. Yeah, of course, it was uncomfortable for me at first because I wasn't really sure what I was getting into and how I was going to be accepted, or if I was going to be accepted. But for me, luckily, I found that I quickly was, which was great. And I was able to make many friends that way. But the key that I'm mentioning this for a reason, because I would like people to understand that this can relate to all of us being uncomfortable with these uncomfortable situations and addressing race and EDI in general. So it's about getting out of your comfort zone. You have to be honest with yourself. Acknowledge the fact that I am uncomfortable. That is okay. And then you have to look at, okay, what are the assumptions and biases here? Because we all have them. So we really have to unlearn those poor behaviors. But how do we do that? We have to embrace the reality, the good, the bad, the ugly, everything that comes of it. And then from there, we look at how do we progress? How do we overcome this? How do we get to that position where we are now including people rather than shutting them out? And so that's how we grow and progress the culture of sport, because we have to expand our minds and change our perspective. Instead of this tunnel vision that we have here, instead of doing that, now we take a step back. We look at how we react, how we respond to other people, and see how that affects them. And check in and say, does this bother you? Or would you rather me do this? Or how can I include them? Ask them, how can I make this a better experience for you? And you'll quickly find that people have a lot to say. So I challenge you guys, honestly, to really take a moment and self-reflect, even those in the BIPOC community. I want to be clear that I'm not just talking about white people. I'm talking about everyone. I can be more inclusive with everybody. People of my own culture, people of indigenous culture, white people, Asians, everybody, you name it. So I want to just really emphasize that this is us all looking at the mirror, because that is where it starts. Like I said in my first blog post, and you'll see it, read it on interruptingsports.com, you'll see it right there, where we're looking at Gandhi's quote when he said that if we want change in the world, we need to change. And so that is what I'm inviting you guys to do. Okay, guys, now just to wrap us up, just in summary, I want us to take away a few things here. I want us to look back and recognize the components of our identity. Look at us, our racial, our ethnic, and our athletic identity, and embrace who we are as individuals to unify us. That is our goal here. And secondly, I want us to acknowledge our realities and hold ourselves accountable so that we can overcome these natural biases and progress the culture of sports. So that is my takeaway for you guys today. All right, guys, that brings us to the end of today's episode. Thank you for taking the time to tune in. Please show some love to your favorite podcast by following us on Instagram at Interrupting Sports. I'll leave you guys today with one last piece of advice. Be the person today that you want to be tomorrow. See you next week.